Parsha Toldot is really our first encounter with Yitzchak's children. So we first encounter Yaakov and Esav as well. Everyone have a sheet?
I don't.
Okay, sorry. So there's more sheets over here. There you go.
Don't know.
So we're introduced to Yitzchak and Rivka's children. We're introduced to Yaakov and Esav. And the question I want to address first is, when we discuss the difference between Yaakov and Esav, Yaakov and Esav were two very, you could say diametrically, even though they're twins, diametrically opposed twins, two totally different personalities. So where do these personalities come from? As I wrote in the heading here, is this nature or is this nurture, right? In psychology they have, there's been much written about the debate between nature and nurture. When you look at a child, and I guess as they grow up, when you look at their tendencies and their traits and the way they act, is that based on nature, based on, I guess you could say, almost DNA and everything that they're given from birth? They don't really almost have a choice to change it. Or is it nurture, that however they're born, they're able, based on the environment that they're put in, is really able to mold what they will eventually become? So just look at source number one here. I brought the psukim where we hear about the pregnancy of Rivka, the difficult pregnancy of Rivka, where she is initially told that she has twins in her stomach. So the children were getting all excited and they were kicking her in the stomach. Said, if so, why is this me? Why is this happening to me? She doesn't understand the pain. So obviously you can imagine that this is beyond what a normal pregnancy would be, because pregnancy is always painful for the woman. But she was obviously experiencing more than what she thought would be normal. So she says, what's happening? So she decides, I'm going to go to God, which meant probably she's going to go to a Navi, whoever it was, go to somebody to ask, to try to get some sort of idea of what is going on. Vayomer Hashem la. So God tells her, Shnei goyim bevinech, that you have two nations in your stomach, Ushnei leumim mime'achi paredu. And you'll have, again, leumim, what's the difference between leumim and goyim is a discussion maybe for another time, but the idea is you're going to have two different nations who are going to come from you. There's going to be this struggle between these two nations, between these two children that are going to come from you. And the older Verab Yavod Sa'ir, the older one will serve the younger one. So based on these psukim, what would you say? I would say that it seems that Yaakov and Esav, it's almost nature. Before they are even born, while they're still in the stomach of Rivka, before they even come out, she's told that they're going to have two different nations. You're going to have two nations come. These two children are going to represent and be the start of two different nations, and there's going to be a struggle between these two nations. And then the psukim continue, and then time came when she was she came to term. And there were twins in her stomach. And Esav is the first one who comes out. He comes out, he's all red. They call him Esav. And then only afterwards his brother comes out. And he's holding on to Esav's heel. Yaakov. And therefore he is named Yaakov. And Yitzchak was 60 when this all happened. And then, so this is how we're initially introduced to Yaakov and Esav. Our initial introduction to Yaakov and Esav, again, you're going to have these two different nations coming out of Rivka. That's one. And then we're told that their appearance seems to be very different as well. And then Vayigdlu hane'arim, and then as they grew up, Vayihi Esav ish yodeh atzat ish sadeh, V'Yaakov yishtam yoshev ohalim, that Esav is a man of the field, he's a hunter, he likes to be out there. And Yaakov is, somebody who prefers quiet, he prefers meditation, he prefers to be by himself. Yoshev ohalim, he sits in tents. But he was the one in the base medrash, and Esav was the one out hunting and doing all these things. Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav kitzayit befiv. And Yitzchak loved Esav because of the food, seemingly that he was able to hunt and then bring to his father. V'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov. And Rivka loves Yaakov. That's all we're going to read for now. Then the story continues with the Bechorah, how Esav sells his firstborn rights to Yaakov because he came in and was hungry. So that's a different story. But when you read these psukim, I think the indication almost is that Yaakov and Esav, the destiny almost from birth, they're destined to be two completely different people. Really, almost you could say no chance for Esav to be good and Yaakov to be bad. Maybe that's going a bit extreme, but we're told that they're going to certainly represent two different nations, two completely different people. Again, this already comes from before they're even born. This is how God tells Rivka what's going to be. And to further the point, I just want to bring Rashi here. The Rashi here quotes from the Midrash, one that many here might be familiar with. So, Rabotinu darshu lashon ritza. The question in source number 2 that Rashi and the commentators are bothered with is, what does this word mean? The first word in source number 1, Vayitrotzitzu habanim b'kirba. What does that word mean? Vayitrotzitzu. So the rabbis explain it meaning lashon ritza. What does ritza mean? Ritza means to run. So what was happening? Kishahaita overet al pitchei Torah Shoshem va'ever. When Rivka used to pass by the base medrash of Shem va'ever, so what happened? Yaakov ratz umefarches latzeit. So what does it mean vayitrotzitzu? What does it mean that they were running? It's almost that they were running, trying to get out. So when they passed by the base medrash, Yaakov was there running. He was trying to get out. He had this inclination to cling towards the base medrash. And then it continues, but overes al pische avodah zara, when she would pass by those who were worshipping idols, so what happened? Esav, mefarches, let's say. It was Esav who was trying to run out. It was Esav who was kicking and squirming in order to try to get out, because he was clinging towards this avodah zara. So you can see here, I think what this Midrash just further highlights is the same question. He's further highlighting this question, further highlighting this point, in terms of saying that Yaakov and Esav from birth seem to be destined, Yaakov was almost destined for greatness, destined to be the good guy, the good twin, and Esav from birth seems to be destined to be this bad twin. Now, this is somewhat troubling because we believe one of the hallmarks of being Tselem Elokim is this idea of Bechira Chofshit almost, this idea of having free choice. And the truth is, I wanted to look to see, does anyone discuss this idea? Did Esav have any element of free choice? If Esav was already told from birth, the Midrash tells us that he was already clinging to Avodah Zarah, what choice did he have? Could we blame him almost for being as bad as he was? And I couldn't really find anybody who discusses this question. Where does the question of free choice come up? Where do most commentators discuss it in the Torah? With Paro, right? The main discussion comes with Paro. If Hashem is promising to Abraham that they're going to be a nation and they're going to be enslaved, could we blame the Egyptians? Could we blame Paro for being so bad? And that's really the place in the Torah, the starting point where many of the commentators have their long discussions. How do we reconcile free choice with this idea of Nevuah? And it's a very important question, because if we believe that's one of the main, what it means to be a Tselem Elokim, what it means to be creating God's image, is almost the idea of having free choice, being able to choose between what's good and what's bad. So it's just a question almost, when you read this, when you were introduced to Esav and Yaakov, what free choice, based on this Midrash, based on the Psukim itself, did Esav even have this element of free choice in order to be good? And it's really unclear. What is the Midrash telling us that from birth that he was already clinging towards Avodah Zarah? Maybe that was his inclination, and his free choice was, everyone has their own struggles, and maybe that was Esav's struggle. Esav's struggle would have to be, it's true that's what his inclination was, but he'd have to overcome that. That would be his struggle, and even though Yaakov, it seems like, had an easier time, maybe Yaakov would have other struggles to deal with. We know Yaakov had many struggles in his life. So it's almost one way to look at it, is to say, no, Yaakov and Esav from birth, already from when we're first introduced to them, they're destined to be, Yaakov almost for greatness, and Esav, I could say, for wicked. And then you almost have to then deal with the question was, well, how is that fair to Esav? Was there free choice? Was there not free choice? And that's almost, I think, one way to look at it. And that's the way I always thought about it, and probably the way I've always taught about it, that, think about this Midrash, that Esav, Avodah Zarah, Yaakov was meant for good. But there's a fascinating, here's what I want to spend more time discussing in sources 3 and 4. There's another way to look at this whole Yaakov and Esav paradigm in terms of Yaakov being great and Esav being bad. And that is not to say that it was nature that from birth that was destined to happen, but in fact they only came to this point, it only was that Esav was bad and Yaakov was good based on the way that they were raised. So where this discussion starts is in source number 3. Source number 3, there's another midrash, the Midrash Rabbi talks about it, and it's based on the second to last pasuk in source number 1. The pasuk was Vayigdalu hane'arim, that the ne'arim, that they grew up, that the Yaakov and Esav grew older, and then it tells us Vahi Esav ish yodeh tzait ish sadeh, that Esav was the man in the field, and Yaakov was, the quiet one, ish tam, a simple yoshev ohalim. So based on this pasuk, so the Midrash wants to explain. First it says Vayigdalu hane'arim, that they grew up, and only once they grew up, then it tells us about this distinction between Esav and Yaakov. Vayigdalu hane'arim, they grew up, maybe they hit bar mitzvah, maybe they were, some people say they hit bar mitzvah, the other way is that they were maybe 15 years old, because based on what follows, the story which follows in terms of Yaakov and Esav and the Bechorah, selling the Chazal tell us that whole episode took place what day? Why was Yaakov cooking lentils? What took place on that day? Right, Abraham had died, and lentils were a food that you cook almost for mourners. So if that was really the day that Abraham died, so then the boys had to be 15, because Abraham died at 175. Abraham was 100 when he gave birth to Yitzchak. Yitzchak was 60 when he gave birth to Yaakov and Esav, so that means when Abraham was 160, so when Abraham was 175, Yaakov and Esav were 15. So either way, whether it was 13 or 15, as Yaakov and Esav mature and hit puberty and hit that stage in life, so that's when it seems that they became two totally different people. So the Midrash explains in source number 3, Rabbi Levi Amar, Mashal lehadas v'itzbonit shehayu gdelim ze al gabe ze. So the parable, how are we going to explain Yaakov and Esav growing up? So compare it to a hadas which we shake on Sukkot. So the hadas in English is a myrtle, right? And itzbonit, I'm not exactly sure, but it's some sort of thorny bush. So the parable is a hadas v'itzbonit shahayu gdelim ze al gabe ze. So they're growing next to each other, and they actually look very similar to each other. However, b'cheivan shehigdilu v'hifrichu, but once these two plants, once the itzponit and once the hadas start blossoming, or not blossoming, so the hadas gives off its smell, the hadas smells very nice, but the itzponit at that point doesn't have anything positive to give off, that's when it starts sprouting its thorns. So here the Midrash says they're 13. Kol Yud Gimel Shana, so for the first 13 years of their life, Shnehem holchim lebeit hasefer. They went to school. They went to the Talmud Torah. They went to the Cheder, whatever. They went to living in Israel at the time. So Shnehem holchim lebeit hasefer. Ushnehem ba'im lebeit hasefer. So they went to school every day and they came home every day and they were twins and they got along and everything was great. However, le'achar yud gimel shana. But once they started maturing, once they hit the age of 13, once they were bar mitzvah, once they started almost taking their own direction in life. So at that point, so that's when you notice the difference between these two brothers. So at the age of 13, Yaakov started going to Beis Medrash, and this one, and Esav started going to the houses of idol worship. So here, you almost get this different idea from the Midrash than what we were initially. The first Midrash, now how you can reconcile the two, maybe you don't have to, and I'm not going to try to. The first one told us almost that from birth already, Yaakov had this inclination to the Beis Medrash, and Esav had this inclination to the Avodah Zarah. This Midrash is telling us something different. It wasn't, maybe that they had their maybe at birth that was it. Didn't happen right away. It wasn't that Yaakov initially had this inclination one way and Esav the other way. It was after 13 years, after they matured, at that point when they started taking their own direction in life, that's when they each went their own separate ways. And based on this, and this is what I want to read. I want to read source number 4. And source number 4 is Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, was the rabbi in the 19th century, one of the, the father of the movement of Torah in Derech Eretz, the German community, and also was a fierce opponent of the Reform movement. And he has a commentary on Chumash, so I apologize for bringing the Hebrew. I just couldn't bring the English. I like to bring Hebrew if it's the original source, but here his commentary was written in German, so there isn't anything so great about reading it in the Hebrew, but that's what I found online. You can't get the English one online, but I want to read through it and then discuss what exactly he's going to say. And he reads this midrash and thinks that actually this is a harsh criticism of Yitzchak and Rivka. That it's we're going to see what he's going to blame, and we'll see if this is fair or not. He's going to blame Yitzchak and Rivka for the differences between Yaakov and Esav. It wasn't that Yaakov and Esav were, from birth, were necessarily destined to be these two separate, good and evil. It was only based on their upbringing did this take place. So how does he understand that from the Midrash? So he writes as follows, in verse number 4, B'shu makom lo nimneu chachamenu miligalot choshot ushkiot. That never did our sages, never the chachamim, hold themselves back from revealing the weaknesses and the mistakes of our forefathers. Some people, like to always protect and say how the Gedolim and the Avos, they never sinned, they never did anything wrong. So Rav Shimshon Hirsch is not taking that approach. He says, no, it's important to point out the mistakes, and important, you can say, almost to point out the weaknesses of our forefathers, because if you see that our leaders, we don't believe our leaders are infallible. We don't believe that they're gods. We believe they make mistakes as well. Doesn't mean you have to spend all your time talking about their mistakes, but if there's something to be talked about, if there's some sort of criticism we can offer based on the actions of our forefathers, of our leaders, so the Chachamim are going to do that. And it continues, Kitanot Gigdolot, whether it's a small mistake, a big mistake, the Chachamim are going to point out their misdeeds. B'ma'aseh avotenu hagdolim. B'davka idekach, and specifically through pointing out their mistakes, Higdilu Torah. So only through that are we able to, make the Torah great. Only through that are we able to really understand and appreciate the lessons, and that way the Torah can spread and be even greater. V'hediru et lekacha lidorot, and through that the messages, the lessons will be learned for generations. If we can point out their mistakes, those will be lessons that we can learn for generations. He points out here, Bereshis Yud Bet Yud. I think that's probably talking about when Avraham goes down to Mitzrayim the first time and lies and with Sarah saying it's her sister. So I don't know what he says there, but he's probably referencing there where maybe Avraham there made a mistake as well, and what we can learn from Abraham's mistake. So he says, Afkan ha'ara achat shelahem miramezet lanu. So here too the Chachamim have a slight hint to us. Ki hanigud she'ha'amok, the deep divide, shebein nechdei Avraham, between the grandsons of Abraham, i.e. Yaakov and Esav, mikoro ha'ikari haya, where did this come from, this deep divide between the two brothers? Lo rak bitchunotehem, not just through their their DNA and their nature, and they were born, ela gam bechinucham halakui, but through their lakui is deficient, through their deficient education that they were given growing up. That's what brought them out to be so different. Anyone want to guess what in this midrash indicates that Yitzchak and Rivka did something wrong, that something was wrong with their education? So what about that? I mean, he's basically more on the midrash. He's basically in the midrash that we read. What in this midrash hints to the fact that maybe Yaakov and Esav weren't given the proper education? He's going to explain it. So just think about it as we get to what he says. So he says, Kol od hayu ktanim, as long as the children were little, lo samu lev lehevdelei netioteim hanistarot. Don't think that the two children, just because they were twins, were exactly the same when they were born. But when they were children, their parents didn't give enough attention to the differences, to the nuances between Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov and Esav were not exactly the same. There were differences between them, maybe not as profound, as pronounced as once they got older and started going, to the Avodah Zarah and the base measures, but it doesn't mean they were exactly the same when they were children, but nobody paid attention to these differences between them. So, and therefore what happened? V'torah achat v'chinuch echad ha'niku lishnehem. And they gave them the same Torah, and they gave them the exact same education. What Rav Shimshon Bar Hirsch is picking up on is that, going back to source number 3, what did it say in source number 3? It said, Kol Yud Gimel Shana, Shneim Holkin L'Beit HaSefer, Shnehem Ba'im L'Beit HaSefer. That for 13 years, they did the exact same things. They went to the same school. They went to the same school in the morning, they came home from the same school at night. Everything they did was exactly the same. And Rav Shimshon Bar Hirsch says that's not a good thing, right? Because they're not the same child. Yaakov and Esav weren't the same. They weren't meant to both go to the same school. One of them had to go to, Eitz Chaim, and one was meant to go to Associated. You can't send them both to the same school, because you send them both to the same school, then you're going to have problems. So he said they were given the same education. V'shachachu klal gadol b'chinuch. And they forgot the most maybe important message in education, chanoch lanar al pi darko, that everyone has to be educated based on where they are. Every child's different. Every child needs to be taught somewhat differently, and Yitzchak and Rivka somehow neglected to pick up on this point. And yesh lechaven et hachanich be'etem ledarko miyuchedet lo be'atid, and you have to train the child in the way that will be most fitting for him in the future. Haholemet et hatchunot v'netiyot harmot b'imkei nafsho, the ones that will almost bring out the inner, the DNA will bring out, whatever is inside of them, the way they're trained, everyone has their own, you could say, inclinations and strengths. So we want to pronounce those strengths. We want to make sure that they come to light. And we want to bring everyone to fulfill their goal. Not everyone's going to have the same goal in life. Not everyone's going to be able to be, the same profession. Not everyone could be a lawyer. Not everyone could be a doctor. Not everyone could be a rabbi. Everyone, you have to train them to what's going to be best fitting for them. Right? Ultimately, we all have the same goal. Ultimately, our goal is all to worship to God. But the ways that we worship God, we don't all have to worship God. We don't have to serve God the same way. I have some source sheets over here if anyone wants. Oh, there may be some that side also. Okay, but the way we get to that point is going to be different. Rab Gav Niot, I didn't know what that meant, so Google Translate said it meant multicolored. So the idea is that the way we're going to even though we all have the same goal, we're going to get to that goal very, very differently. The way we all live our different lives, those are going to be how each person worships Hashem differently. And therefore he says, so when Yaakov brought his sons together, when Yaakov at the end of his life brings his sons together to bless them, and he's almost giving prophecy to what each tribe is going to represent in the future. He didn't look at them and say, everyone here is a Kohen, everyone here is a teacher, I'm going to give you all a blessing and you're all going to be the same, you're all going to be teachers, you're all going to sit in base medrash all day. No. He said one shevet was the Levim, and they would be the ones to serve at the Beit HaMikdash. The shevet HaMlucha and Yehuda would be the leaders. They would be the king, and they'd serve as the political leaders, the leaders of the Jewish people. And shevet HaSochrim, and you'd have one tribe which would be the Sochrim, they would be the merchants. The shevet HaAkarim, and one would be the farmers. The shevet HaLochamim, and one would be the fighters and the warriors. Amacham leneged einav ha'am kulo, and he was able to look at all of his children and see how they all represented something different. Al kol sgulatav harab gav niyot, again based on their different merits. Ve'al kol darchei hitpatchuto, the way they're all open up and reveal themselves in a different way. And at kulam hu beirach, and how did he bless them all? Ish asher kibirchato beirachotam. He didn't bless them all that they should be the same thing, they should all, fit into one little mold. But ish asher kibirchato beirachotam, the way that each one expressed themselves in their in their best manner. So that's the way he blessed them. He wanted them all to take their strengths and use those strengths in order to be the most successful. Because the brit that Hashem made with Abraham, right? How do you do it? You want to do it with a nation which is complete, right? Multifaceted. You want to do it with a heterogeneous, nation. Matarata livnot chaye am shleimim al kol tzuratim harabbaniot. We want to build a complete life, a complete society, not homogeneous. Again, all based on the same idea. Lishmor derech Hashem lasot tzedakah mishpat. We're all working towards the same idea to serving God, but again, we're going to serve God differently. We're all going to serve God the same way, and that's okay, and that's fine. Everyone should find their own strength and do it in their own fashion. Hakoach v'ha'ometz. So, okay, we'll skip. We'll stop for this for the rest of the paragraph. The way I like to explain it, is through sports. Is that the best sports teams are the teams where, let's say for basketball, so not everyone has to score. You don't need everybody on your team to score points. You're not going to be a good team. But you need somebody to score. You need people to pass. You need some people to rebound. You need everybody to. And when everybody builds on their own strengths, so that's how you bring together a complete team, a winning team. So it's saying the same thing here. We don't all have to be the same. We don't need everybody to fit the same mold. Everybody's going to have their own strength. And when you put it all together, so that's really what builds a winning nation. That's what builds a complete nation. So then going on to the next paragraph. Davka mishum kach, and because of this, chanoch lanar al pi darko. That's where you have to educate everybody based on their own strength. Chanechehu l'matara hagdolah ha'achat al pi darko miuchedet lo. Educate them based on what will best fit them. Educate them based on the child, how you'll bring out the strengths of that child. Behetem le'atid hatzapui lo minitiotav. That which will fit, if you can imagine what they're going to be, I think he's going to be, a great scientist, so educate him in order that he'll be able to fulfill that goal. Hamoshiv et Yaakov Esav al safsal limudim echad. If you just take Yaakov and Esav and throw them onto the same bench, in the same school, you teach them, get in the same class, and they're learning at the same level. You think they're at the same level in Chumash, and they're at the same level in philosophy. Guaranteed that one of them is going to fail, because they're not the same. And if you're going to give them the exact same education, guaranteed that they're going to fail. Yaakov yishav mimayana chokhmah b'chevetz gover v'holech. Yaakov is the student. He's the one who will gain the most from being put, on this bench and being able to gain from that. Ve'ilu Esav rak yitzapeh layom. But what is Esav? Esav is only waiting for the day. Bo yashlich me'achorei gabot sfarim hayishanim. Right? He can't wait till he reaches, the age of 13, when he doesn't have to go to school anymore and throw away the books and never go back. V'yachad itam tudat chaim agdolah. Shikir ota rak ba'ofen chad stadi. Again, they were very different, and giving them the same education is almost what ruined them. So, ilu ha'miku Yitzchak v'Rivka lachdor l'nefesh Esav. If Yitzchak and Rivka decided to give almost any input into who Esav actually was, ilu hikdimu lishol et atzmam. Maybe if they asked themselves, Heyach yicholim gam ha'ometz. How could we take Esav's, say physical strength, hakoach, v'hagmishut harudumi b'nefesh Esav, all those. The inner strength, or the physical strength of Esav, the energy that he have. How could we take the energy of Esav? How could we turn that to worship God? Had they done that, had they tried to take his strength and pushed him in a positive way, he wouldn't have been a gibor tzayid, ela legibor lifnei Hashem be'emet. He would have been a gibor Lifnei Hashem. And that's what Rosh Shofar Hirsch says about Yaakov and Esav, which is very harsh. Very, very harsh on Yitzchak and Rivka. I mentioned this last year somewhere, and Rabbi Korofkin heard me mention it, and he said, is it fair? Do you think it's fair? Is it true? Can we blame Yitzchak and Rivka so much for Yaakov and Esav? Again, it seemed like from the beginning that was almost their destiny to be so different. How could we, and it's a good question, how could we, is it true, could we really blame Yitzchak and Rivka for everything? Rosh Shofar Hirsch is, again, here, it's very, very critical of the way they brought them up. Again, just basing it on the fact that they went to the same school, but the idea was they tried to educate them to be the same person, and because they tried to do that, they ultimately failed. Now this can go together in terms of, people like to make a lot of the relationship between Yitzchak and Rivka. Right? When's the first time we see Yitzchak and Rivka talk? They don't have a discussion in the Torah until the end of the parsha, I think, until after the whole episode with Yaakov and Esav and the brachas, and pretty much when Yaakov has to run away, I think that's the first time they have a discussion. So much is made in terms of Yitzchak and Rivka, what was their relationship like, and if their relationship was problematic, then maybe that affected the children as well. Again, I'm not sure, obviously this is all speculation, we don't actually know, because last week's parsha, it seems like they have a great relationship. When Rivka comes, Rivka is almost able to replace Sarah, Yitzchak loves her, so it seems like they have a good relationship. But there are indications where maybe not everything was perfect. They don't talk so much, right? The last pasuk in source number 1. What was the idea of Yitzchak loving Esav and Rivka loving Yaakov? Are the parents choosing sides, right? Is that healthy for the relationship? There are questions to think about. Now, whether the whole criticism of Yitzchak and Rivka is true or not, the message is certainly true. The message that he's trying to get across, I think it's twofold. The message that Rosh Hashanah is trying to get across, I think, is a message for the educators, but it's also a message for the students as well. And that the message for the educators, I think, was clear. That you can't educate every child the same. You have to try to find each child's strength and build upon their strength. But at the same time, there's a message for the student as well, and that's not every student, has to believe that there's only one way in life. There's only one path I have to go, and if I don't take that one path, then I'm a failure, right? If my whole family are doctors and I become a doctor, I'm a failure. No, again, we believe in a rich, multifaceted community where everyone can pick up on their own strength, and there's nothing wrong with if you can't become a doctor or you're not cut out to learn in Beis Medrash all day, because you have other strengths which are okay, and you can still be a complete Oved Hashem, based on everything we're saying with Yaakov, right? Why are we Bnei Yisrael? Maybe the idea of waiting until Yaakov had 12 children, if we were all based on, we were all Bnei Yaakov, so then maybe you could say we all have to fit into one mold, we have to fit into the Yaakov mold. Once you're Bnei Yisrael, once you're 12 different tribes, you have 12 different molds to fit into, meaning you have unlimited, numerous molds. We don't all have to be the same. It's bringing together of the 12. It's bringing together, the coming together of all the strength of all the different shvatim, which ultimately will build the best nation that we could possibly have. Yes?
It's interesting because it's such a delicate balance, because I know that Chazal criticized Yaakov for favoring Yosef. So it seems like, and so much subsequent tragedy happened because he favored him.
Right.
But in a way, he went the opposite way, because Yaakov saw Yosef's strength, and he played to them and favored them, and he maybe did the opposite of what you're saying Yitzchak did.
Right. And if that's true, then you wonder if that's, when you see one way as a child, then maybe you want to be somewhat different. But maybe the problem there was also, maybe the problem wasn't that he was, giving this, not that he was trying to pick up on Yosef's strength, but maybe it was almost to the neglect of the others. You could, I think there's a way that you can pick up on everybody's strength without necessarily favoring. That itself is a balance between the two of them.
Sometimes the pendulum swings the whole way the other way, and it's hard to get that exact perfect way of...
I don't think anyone will say parenting is easy, right? So I'm learning that now. So it's certainly not an easy thing, right? And you have to almost try to strike that balance between the two of them. At the same time, when I right after I first saw this, I had a thought. We also maybe in terms of a historical. You had a question? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I'll say my thought after.
So Abraham had 2 sons, and he picked Yitzchak to be his progeny. And then
he picked or God picked, right? That's
well, okay.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with Yitzchak, he picked Yaakov and Esav. Now you're talking about personalities. What was the original? Was that the original plan that they pick one, or is it because of the personalities of 2 that one was picked over the other? And some people say that the brothers of Yosef, they were thinking, one person is going to be picked.
Right.
That's why they were against.
One of the explanations, I think that's probably more the maybe like the more modern school of Tanakh scholars in terms of what the struggle between the brothers and Yosef was, is that, let's look at history, right? Abraham had 2 kids, they chose one. Yitzchak had 2 kids, chose one. Yaakov has kids, well, maybe they're also going to choose one, and they were scared it was going to be Yosef, so that was almost a struggle that they had. Now, what was the initial intention? I don't know. The same way when the world was created, was the initial intention for Adam to be the father of everyone, and then after the Mabul, things changed. Obviously, I'm not gonna. We have no idea what God's initial intention was. But based on that idea, I think that's why it's maybe meaningful that it was only once it was Bnei Yisrael, only once who had this. It wasn't just one person taking on the Masorah, the tradition, but it was 12 different people, 12 brothers. Eventually they were able to almost unite and fulfill this one mission of Yaakov, and so maybe that's why that was able to. The nation was able to grow through them, because it was everyone coming together as opposed to just the one. But going back to if you take Rav Shimon Shofar Hirsch again in the historical context, maybe you can also try to understand a little bit of why he's going to make this point. Again, I mentioned in the beginning that he grew up in Germany, was fighting very much against the Reform movement and others. So you wonder almost, that was a time where people, you could say, quote unquote, were going off the derech. People were going from Orthodoxy and to Reform. And maybe, I don't know exactly what's going on at the time, but maybe this is a criticism probably of his own generation. If you see how, Western culture is becoming embraced somewhat in the community, and you see people have tendencies toward that, again, maybe he's trying to almost tell you we have to embrace that. No, we have to embrace that in a way which is guided, obviously, by Torah, but you have to take it within that eye, but it doesn't mean there's nothing good to come from there. So you just wonder that, maybe this is also a criticism of the education at his time. If you're putting everyone in the same yeshivas and trying to maybe guide, trying to restrict them all from everything that's going on around them, maybe that's what eventually led some people to, his comment before was, if you put them all on the same bench, move tachlo, guaranteed that one of them is going to go off the derech. So it's an important lesson, criticism of Yitzchak and Rivka, but again, you have to balance that with, again, maybe it wasn't totally their fault, but maybe also you wonder if it's also a criticism of his own generation, growing up, maybe trying to say, we have to maybe change our education system to try to look at every child themselves and try to build up their strength, as opposed to trying to fit everyone into one mold, because that will ultimately fail. So they're just the first thing I want to talk about in terms of trying to understand Yaakov and Esav and the lessons we can learn, whether that was initially their intention or more in terms of nurture, and the lesson in terms of education for the children. Just one other small point, and then we'll conclude. On the back of the sheet here, so the next story mentioned after the first one, we saw the beginning of the parsha tells us about Yaakov and Esav's birth, and then really the first story we see between the two of them is Esav comes in from the field and he's tired and he wants food, and Yaakov says, okay, I'll give you food, but you have to sell me your rights as a firstborn. So he says, okay, I'm going to die anyways. What does it mean to me? It doesn't mean anything. So source number 5 on the back here, again I'll just read the pasuk. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov. So Esav tells Yaakov, Haliteni na min ha'adam hazeh. Pour me this red stuff in your hands. Ki ayef anochi. I'm so tired. Just pour it. Throw it into my throat. And then Al Kain kara shemo Edom. And because of this, Esav was called Edom. So Esav's nickname was red, almost. They called Esav red, and Esav is the father of Edom. Edom is one of the nations which struggles a lot with Bnei Israel. Somehow, Edom, I know people have talked about this, I'm not exactly sure how it works. Edom somehow also becomes the father almost of Christianity, that Christianity almost takes on this representation of Edom and the struggle between Christianity and the Jews, which was probably the main struggle the Jews had until the 20th century, until maybe it became with Ishmael and the Muslims. But there's this eternal struggle between Israel and Edom. But Esav is given the name Edom. So who called Esav Edom? Al Kain kara shemo Edom. The Rashbam, one of the commentators on the Chumash, in source number 6, Al Kain kara shemo Edom. Hu Admoni. So we saw in the beginning of the parsha that he himself was probably a redhead. Vehu v'nit'aveh le'echol Adom. But he also had this desire to eat Adom, right? This lentil, this red lentil soup, he had this desire to eat it. Ubishvil ra'avtanuto machar bechorato. And because of his hunger, because of this physical desire to eat, he said, what's this bechora, what does this firstborn right mean to me? It doesn't mean anything to me. And he sold it. So uleshem bizayon kara lo kain. Shebishvil machal adom machar bechorato. So the Rashbam says, who called him Edom? It wasn't, his own appointed nickname. It was his friends, his buddies in the park who called him Edom, or Edom, and it was making fun of him. It was mocking him. You silly person, you had the rights to the firstborn of this, great family, this wealthy family as well, and you sold it all away just to be, for this red stuff, you don't, lentils, red, they couldn't even call it, lentils. Now, admittedly, red is a better name than lentils, but the idea was that, that's what you're selling your firstborn for, just for this ma'achal adom, so it was mocking him. So one way to approach, why was he called Edom? It was mocking him. How silly are you to sell your rights just to eat the lentils? Lentils are certainly no delicacy. They didn't even call lentils, just this red stuff. But the Orach Chaim actually takes a different approach. The Orach Chaim, the Kabbalists, they also a commentary on the Chumash, a later commentary. I don't exactly remember what century, but he thinks that Edom wasn't a name given to him by his buddies. Edom was in fact a self-appointed nickname. Perush hu Esav karashimo Edom. Al king karashimo Edom is he called himself Red. After this incident, he wanted to give himself a nickname. V'hatam lo litzad shekara shem ha'adom shnei pe'amim. It wasn't the fact that, he said min ha'adom hazeh. That's not why he called himself Red. Ela litzad shehaya holech lamut. It's because he was about to die. Ubo hechia nafsho. And because this red stuff, because lentils gave life to him, that's what sustained him, that's what let him live. Kara shemo Edom bishmo. He's almost giving hakara satov. He's giving gratitude to this red stuff, to this lentils that he was able to eat, which sustained him, let him live. So he decided to call himself Red. The Esav badik bishma. And you should know that Esav is somebody who's very careful about names. How do we know Esav is very careful and thinks there's a message to be learned from names? Why? Because Hayaki Omro Hachi Kara Shemo, right after the whole episode with the second episode in the Parsha with the bracha, how Yaakov takes Esav's bracha. So Esav says, Hachi Kara Shemo Yaakov. You know why they called him Yaakov? Because Vayakveni Zeh Pa'amayim. Vayakveni is also from the word of he tricked me. They called him Yaakov because he's a tricky man. He tricked me twice. First he stole my Bechora, first he stole my rights, and then he stole my bracha as well. So we see Esav thinks there's something to be learned from names. The fact that he can look at Yaakov's name and say, oh, it means trickery, and that's what is his essence. Yaakov's essence is tricking me. So he says, so for him as well, he thought it was important to give himself a name based on this episode, to let him live, and he called himself Adom. Or Edom, again, based on this. But I think that, as much as Esav is trying to give Hakar Zadom, I think he's missing the point. If you want to give some sort of gratitude, you want to call yourself based on this episode, so have some sort of appreciation for the food. What kind of appreciation does he have for it? He doesn't even call it lentils. He just calls it like this red stuff. He gives it almost no thought behind the whole thing, just to give himself that name and call himself based on that. And maybe based on this idea of Esav, even though he wanted to almost show appreciation for this food, he didn't really understand the special quality of food, right? We believe, food, even though it's something physical, we always believe that food can be used in an elevated fashion. And I think Esav is almost missing the point here, by not, even though he wants to call himself based on this food, he's not able to give it any more thought than just calling it this red stuff. And maybe that's, just want to suggest, maybe that's what Yitzchak had in mind. Again, when Yitzchak asks for bracha, Yitzchak is getting old and he wants to bless his son, so he wants to bless Esav, and he tells Esav to bring him food. And look at the Sforno. The Sforno, again, another commentary, how does he explain this idea of va'aseh li matamim? Yitzchak says, make me tasty food, we'll have a meal, and I'll give you a bracha. He says, Ratza b'matamim, says he wanted to give him this food, kidei sheit asek b'kibud av. So he wanted to fulfill this mitzvah of kibud av, uvazeh tachul alav bracha, and almost through that merit, of fulfilling the mitzvah of kibud av, he'll be able to give him this bracha. Kigam shelo hikir begodel risho shel Esav, even though he didn't realize how bad Esav was, right? Yitzchak loved Esav, but he never understood how evil Esav was. Mikol makom lo chashav oto l'ra'ui shetachul alav ota bracha shayab libo levarcho. Even though he didn't think he was, he didn't realize how terrible he was. He also knew he wasn't amazing, so he thought, let's give him a few more merits here. So let him bring me this food, and we'll have this meal, and through that, I'll be able to bless him. V'lachen kisheberach Yaakov achar kach sheyada bo shehu ra'ui livracha. And therefore, and he explains at the end, when he blesses Yaakov afterwards, he never asks Yaakov to bring him food. I think it's referring to Yitzchak blesses Yaakov twice in the parsha. He blesses Yaakov the first time when Yaakov, quote unquote, steals Esav's bracha, and then he afterwards, right? The whole end of the parsha is a bit confusing because it seems like Yaakov has to run away from Esav, and at the end of the parsha, that's why I mentioned I think Yaakov and Yitzchak and Rivka have their first conversation. Yitzchak and Rivka have this conversation of saying, oh, we need to send away Yaakov because he needs to get married. No mention of having to run away from Esav, and Esav wants to kill him, etc. And there too, at that point, Yitzchak blesses Yaakov a second time, and that's where he gives him the bracha, Birkat Avraham. So there was always a bracha that was intended to be given to Yaakov. This Birkat Avraham, maybe this continuing on this tradition from Abraham, was always meant to be given to Yaakov. So when Yitzchak wants to bless Yaakov there, he doesn't need any food from him. He only needs food for Esav because he wants to teach him, to give him this opportunity almost to fulfill this mitzvah, to make him ra'ui, to receive this bracha. So based on this idea of using the food almost as a merit to Esav, maybe you could say he's almost trying to teach him the elevated quality of food as well. That, Esav prided himself on calling, I called himself Edom, I see food only as this red thing, he's not appreciating, you could say almost the spiritual qualities of food. And maybe that's what the message of Yitzchak asking Esav to bring him food before the bracha as well. Yes, he wanted him to have merits of kibud avayim, but maybe he also wanted to have merits of understanding you can have a sudat mitzvah. You can have food which is used in an elevated fashion. That's what we sometimes struggle with that in Judaism, but we very much believe in this idea of elevating our food. When the Rambam talks about, the Rambam in his Code of Jewish Law, in the Mishnah Torah, so he has one section called Kedusha. So one section called, one of the 14 books is called Kedusha. So what is in this Kedusha? So you might think Kedusha maybe refers to the Beit HaMikdash or things. No, in Kedusha, what does he talk about? He talks about Isturei Bia. He talks about the laws of relationships, intimacy between man and woman. And then he also talks about the laws of food, Machalot Asura. That's where he talks about the laws of kashrut, etc. Right? That's what is kadosh. We believe in this idea of elevating our food, taking the physical but using it in a spiritual manner. And perhaps that's the lesson that Yitzchak is trying to give Esav as well, in terms of giving him the bracha, yes, kibud avayim, but also understanding the spiritual qualities of food as well, and using those qualities to elevate yourself in an elevated manner, and again, in a way to really serve God. So that was just two thoughts related to the Parsha, and hopefully learn a few lessons from, actually mainly from Esav. We see even learn some lessons from ones who we don't view necessarily as the most righteous in the Torah, but certainly views lessons for generations as well. Have a good morning and have a great week, everyone.
Thank you.